For today's mini lesson, we're going to talk about classroom design and how physical space impacts student learning. The objective of today's lesson is to identify factors of physical space and how they impact the learning process, and the overall goal is to determine the best classroom design for your students. When we talk about physical space, there's a few different factors to consider, some of which we have control over and some of them we don't. Color would be a good example of something you don't have a lot of control over. Chances are, whatever color is on the walls in your classroom, that's kind of what's staying there unless you have permission to go in and repaint, which most of us don't. Lighting would be another example that you don't have a lot of control over, but there may be some factors about lighting that you haven't thought about. Could be using natural lighting versus fluorescent lighting. It could be if you have the opportunity to control how many lights are on, if you have multiple light switches, that could be a factor. And this could even include the ability to turn off the lights and project something onto a screen. These are all factors that would contribute to learning that have to do with the physical space. Temperature, you may or may not be able to control, but we've all been uncomfortably hot or uncomfortably cold, and we know that can be detrimental to our focus. One thing you do have a lot of control over, though, and this is what we're going to focus on today, is the furniture of the room. You might not be able to choose which chairs, tables, desks that are in your room, but you definitely can control how they are arranged. And I want you to think about, with that in mind, what does your room say about learning? So put yourself in the perspective of a new student walking into the classroom for the first time. Based on the arrangement of the furniture, what does that classroom indicate to you? Because the thing is that the classroom setup, it's a nonverbal cue. It tells your students what kind of learning takes place. If you are someone who likes to hide in the back, and you enter a classroom that has, the typical 3 rows by 5 rows, that becomes very easy to do. Whereas if you walked into a classroom that was set up into tables, you can't really hide when you're in small groups. So take that into consideration. What does your classroom say about the type of learning that takes place? We're going to start here with a couple pictures of couches, which you probably don't have in your classroom, but let me just explain here. So just looking at these couches, you are getting nonverbal cues of what's expected. The couch in the upper left is a very comfortable couch. It's cozy. I think I've owned that couch, and it's very comfortable to nap on. The one on the top right, however, the yellow leather couch, it's a beautiful couch. Probably very expensive too. However, that couch says, "Welcome, but please don't stay long." And the couch on the bottom, it's more of a work of art than anything. I don't know if anybody is actually even expected to sit in that couch. So just looking at these 3 different couches, 3 different nonverbal cues of what is expected from these 3 pieces of furniture. And the same is true for rooms. And I know these aren't classrooms, but it'll help you get the idea of what we're saying here. I don't have to tell you what kind of rooms these are. I don't have to verbally express what goes on in these rooms. There are cues based on the arrangement of the furniture and the type of furniture that helps you understand what's expected when you walk into these rooms. And your classroom does the same thing. The classroom arrangement is going to impact concentration, focus, attention span, and communication, which I think is a huge aspect for our students. So if we set up a classroom that promotes communication, we're going to have an easier task of getting them to share ideas, contribute answers. And when I say communication, it doesn't have to be just between the teacher and the student. This could also be between the students and their peers. So we're going to look at some examples. And I want you to think, with each picture that you see, I want you to think about what this classroom arrangement says to you. Put yourself in the perspective of a student. It's fine to look at this from the perspective of a teacher too. Think about what types of learning activities take place in these particular classroom arrangements, and also think about where the learning is focused. It would be great if you would write your answers down so that you can reflect on this later. So if you have to pause the video, no problem. You can go get some paper and pencil, and we're going to get started. Here's the first classroom. Again, if you want to pause the video so that you can move at your own pace, I encourage that. Think again, what activities take place in this classroom? Where is the learning focused? Here's the next classroom. Again, what activities take place in this classroom and where is the learning focused? What types of activities go on in this classroom and where is the learning focused? What type of activities go on in this classroom and where is the learning focused? And here's our last one. Last time, what activities go on in this classroom and where's the learning focused? All right, let's go back through. I'm going to share with you some of my observations. Again, these are observations. These are not, necessarily fact, but use them to help you formulate how you might design your classroom. And I'd be happy to hear your opinions too. That'd be great if you could share them in the comment section. First of all, when I approach a classroom like this as a student, this room has a distinct front and back. So if I feel like hiding that day, I know exactly where to go. Trust me, our students are all thinking this. The work in this classroom appears to probably be mostly independent. However, because you're sitting in twos, there may be some partner work or collaboration with one person. There's probably note-taking going on. And if I wanted to speak, especially to address the entire class or the teacher, this would be kind of the raise your hand and wait to get called on situation. The focus is very much on the front of the room, where I'm assuming the teacher probably has some sort of chalkboard or whiteboard. And this is a very typical classroom. There's nothing wrong with this classroom setup, these are just some observations. Okay, this classroom, if we start with this concept of where's the front and where's the back, if you wanted to blend in on this day, it might be a little bit harder because we really only have 2 rows here. So where's the front, where's the back? This is typical of a whole group discussion. So instead of maybe just communicating with one person, you have the ability to listen and to share ideas with the whole group. It's probably still raise your hand to talk because the way this is set up, it looks like probably the teacher is centered it is teacher centered to a certain degree, but more so as a facilitator to keep the conversation going. Next classroom, this is a completely different feel. There's no front or back of this classroom. When we look at the way the tables are set up, this is to promote collaboration and peer interaction. So you're not raising your hand to talk to anybody. These are small group discussions and idea sharing. This is very typical for group work or projects or labs, and the focus would be at each individual table. So there's not one central focus for all of the students. It's going to be shared amongst the different groups. The teacher in this case is probably more strictly just a facilitator, meaning they kind of monitor the classroom, check in with the groups, and make sure they're staying on task and are focused. And an interesting feature here is a little table set up so that the teacher can kind of call groups over or individual students and work with them as needed. Lecture hall, right? So there's definitely a front and back to this room. So if you want to hide or if you want to be in the exciting front row, you have that option in this classroom setup. Again, this is lecture. This is listening and note taking. This is not set up for collaboration. And in some cases, we don't necessarily want collaboration. This is definitely a situation where you're going to be raising your hand to talk, teacher focused. And when I look at a setup like this, it reminds me of maybe something we would set up if we had to take a test. So again, the expectation is that you are not talking to each other, that your focus is forward. And literally those desks, you have limited amount of space. So this does not promote creating, pulling a lot of resources. Is kind of focusing on one individual thing at a time. And here's our last setup. This one's interesting. There's no front or back of the room in this case either. In fact, it kind of makes you question where is the teacher? Is the teacher sitting with the students? Is the teacher at a separate desk, just allowing this group to function on its own? It promotes equal roles. We've got everybody contributing into the center. So no front row, no back row. This is good for discussions and idea sharing. I could even see this room working as set up for a debate. So we've looked at 5 fairly different classroom setups. And I want you to think about, what does your classroom say? Does your classroom say more like, today we're going to be taking notes and listening to a lecture? Does it promote whole group discussion? Is it kind of a partner situation, a little bit of note taking, a little bit of collaboration? Maybe a debate or a lab. Maybe you're doing a science lab or you're working on a group project. Your task now for your next lesson: match the physical space of your classroom with the activity of the lesson. So think about what you want to accomplish next week, and put that into play. And one thing I want to stress is that, especially in the flexibility of our classrooms, you may have students who need to take a test. You may have students who need to do some peer tutoring, or maybe a group that's collaborating on a poem or an article discussion. So there's not one setup that's appropriate all the time, and there might not even be one setup that's appropriate for one day. You might have a few desks set to the side for test taking, a few tables for collaboration. So think about the needs of your students, and your task, again, match the physical space of the classroom with the activities of the lesson. Good luck.